The city was covered in an excess of lights, decorations, and music, as if every Who were trying to prove to the world and to themselves that their joy was real. It was the famous annual light contest, that ritual supposedly meant to celebrate Christmas, but that in reality celebrated something else. The obsession with appearing happy, the need to feel superior. And that night, among the radiant, satisfied crowd, someone appeared who didn't fit the perfect mold of that spectacle of forced smiles: the Grinch. He entered timidly, almost accidentally, with that improvised outfit, that awkward energy of someone trying to take part in a world that had been closing its door on him for years. And still, there was something in his eyes that no one in Whoville wanted to see. A real desire to belong, to be part of it, to say, "Here I am, could I be one of you?" But the glances cut him down before he could even try. Stifled laughs were heard, whispers, gestures disguised as courtesy. That kind of smile that doesn't express kindness, but polite contempt. The smile that hurts more than a direct insult. The Grinch, trying to keep up with the contest, exaggerated his movements, mimicked the applause, tried to fit into that perfect choreography of the Who's. But the more he tried, the clearer the truth became. No one there truly wanted to see him. No one wanted to accept that different one, the excluded one, the outcast, had the audacity to show up at their most cherished celebration. Because if he entered, even just a little, the illusion of their collective goodness would fall apart. After all, what is a society built on appearances, if not a fragile castle afraid of the wind? And while the Who's pretended to support him, they were actually waiting for him to fail. They applauded him with sarcasm, looked at him with that mix of mockery and pity shown only by those who believe themselves superior. They didn't see him as a guest, but as an intruder, a living reminder that their perfect world had cracks. And here, in this instant, in this ridiculous contest full of lights and masks, we can see the uncomfortable truth. The Who's were not the kind people they pretended to be. They were the sweetest, most polished representation of something we all know: social cruelty disguised as virtue. Because hypocrisy never screams. Hypocrisy smiles. And in Whoville that night, it smiled too much. But to understand why that smile was so dangerous, why that city seemed so happy but at the same time so broken, we have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of their Christmas, but the beginning of their collective lie. Whoville was born as a small, warm, simple town. A place where people shared more stories than presents, and where the lights were less important than the nighttime conversations between neighbors. There was something genuine in the early days of the Who's, something that today feels almost unreal. Love without competition, unity without spectacle, community without the need to prove anything. But the years passed, expectations grew, and with them, pressure grew too. At first, it was just small details, a light here, a decoration there. Then came comparison. Who decorated more? Who sang better? Who bought more gifts? And later, the complete transformation. Christmas stopped being a refuge and became a stage. Not a celebration, but a silent competition to show who was the most kind, the most joyful, the most worthy of admiration. That was the first step toward their moral fall. And in that world, obsessed with looking perfect, there was no space for a child like the Grinch. From a young age, he was labeled as weird, strange, wrong. Not because he was bad, but because he was different. And in Whoville, difference was a threat. The adults watched him with distrust. The children imitated him to mock him. And no one, not a single one, wondered how it must have felt to grow up that way. No one reflected on the cruelty they were normalizing. Because when a society is more concerned with its image than with its humanity, empathy becomes a luxury they can no longer afford. Here, it's worth stopping for a moment and looking at ourselves. How many times have we done the same? How many times have we judged someone for their appearance, their way of being, their way of thinking, simply because it was uncomfortable to accept them? The story of the Whos is not a children's tale. It is a mirror that forces us to see our own shadows. It reminds us that many times we are kind only when it's convenient, empathetic only when it costs us nothing, good people only when someone is watching. It reminds us that we have all been part of a crowd that applauds joy in public but enjoys gossip in private. That we are outraged by the evil of others but justify our own. And while the Grinch grew up far from the town, Whoville continued perfecting its theater. Each year, the lights were bigger, the parties louder, the smiles more fake. Behind every decoration, there was an insecurity. Behind every gift, there was emptiness. Behind every kind gesture, there was a deep fear of not being enough. The entire city became a stage where appearance mattered more than sincerity. And as happens in all societies that live behind masks, a monster grew in the shadows, not the Grinch, but themselves. That's why, when he returned that night to the light contest trying to participate, the reaction of the Whos wasn't surprise. It was coherence. Coherence with a society that prefers to exclude the different, rather than admit that its collective goodness was always a carefully decorated lie. Coherence with a town that preferred to keep its illusion intact, even if that meant destroying someone else. And this is where this story stops being history and becomes a warning. Because when a society becomes accustomed to hypocrisy, it loses its sense of humanity. It loses the ability to see itself. It loses its soul. That night, the Whos didn't show kindness. They showed fear, ego, arrogance. They showed that soft evil that doesn't yell or strike, but harms just the same. The evil of indifference. The evil of making someone feel like they don't belong. And perhaps the most terrible part of all is that they didn't see themselves as villains. They saw themselves as good people defending tradition. Just like we so often do when we choose the comfort of judging instead of the effort of understanding. As the Grinch walked away from the contest, Whoville kept celebrating as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't destroyed someone right in front of their eyes, as if wickedness, when shared collectively and disguised as morality, somehow stopped being wicked at all. But what would come after? The day they would wake up with no lights, no gifts, nothing left to hide behind, would be the moment that changed everything. The day that would reveal who they truly were and who they still had the chance to become. That day hasn't arrived yet in this story, but it's close. And when it comes, Whoville will have to face its truth without decorations. When Whoville awoke without lights, without gifts, without the artificial noise they always used to bury their silences, the entire world seemed to pause. The air stood still, as if even the wind understood it should show respect to a society that for the first time stood face to face with its own truth. The Whos stepped out of their homes with the hesitant steps of those unsure if they still had the right to feel like victims. They looked at the empty streets, the bare lampposts, the rooftops without a single glimmer. They looked, above all, at the emotional void left behind when everything they had used to avoid seeing one another finally disappeared. It was a strange moment, almost sacred, in which every face reflected the same silent question. Who are we really when everything we pretended to be is turned off? The mayor, who had so often flaunted his leadership as if it were an invisible crown, walked toward the center of the plaza with his brow furrowed and breath unsteady. His speech wasn't prepared. He couldn't hold on to his usual posture, because the city before him was no longer the one he had ruled with that arrogance wrapped in carols. He tried to speak, but every word got stuck in his throat. Not from fear, from shame. Because now he understood what he had refused to see for years.
that his people hadn't built a tradition, but a collective lie, and that every bright little Christmas bulb they had hung each December wasn't celebrating joy, but masking a lack of empathy. That truth weighed so heavily that even his shadow seemed to bend under it.
Cindy Lou Who was the only one who moved naturally among the adults, as if the absence of decorations had restored clarity to the world. She approached the mayor, not to scold him, but to look at him with a sincerity that disarms. Then she turned toward the crowd. Her eyes searched for something she hadn't found in the previous day's celebration, a spark of humanity. And when she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper that felt louder than any Christmas song. It's not Christmas that was lost, it's us. Those words didn't accuse, they didn't forgive either. They simply pointed out, with an honesty impossible to dodge, that the Whos had lost themselves long before the Grinch came down their chimneys. And that realization, like a knife that cuts without anger, but with surgical precision, opened in them a wound they had refused to see. They remembered, one by one, every moment they had justified as jokes, traditions, little things of life. They remembered how they mocked the Grinch when he was a child, how they cast him out of their celebrations, how they never stopped to wonder whether that furry, strange being had a heart that could break too. And in that collective memory, they understood something brutal, that they had created a villain just so they wouldn't have to accept the one reflected in their own mirrors. As they picked up the remnants of broken decorations, something began to change. It was slow, almost imperceptible, like the first ray of sunlight filtering through the clouds after an endless storm. It had no lights, no music, no applause, no cameras, but it had something far more powerful: vulnerability. A mother shared a piece of bread with a neighbor. A child helped lift a broken ornament as if it still held value. An old man removed his coat to cover a shivering little one. And those simple, deeply human gestures began to fill the void the lights had never truly filled. Then, from the mountain, the Grinch saw them. He didn't see them shining. He didn't see them celebrating. He saw them, for the first time, being real. And that image struck him harder than any scream of contempt, because it showed him something he did not expect: that even a society so deeply mistaken could, in its darkest moment, remember how to be human. The Grinch took a deep breath. He didn't know if he should go down. He didn't know if he could trust them. But something in that scene, that silent chorus of joined hands, broke the last layer of ice in his chest. And so, with clumsy, almost frightened steps, he began to descend the mountain. When his figure appeared on the snow, the Whos froze. The fear that once guided them dissolved, replaced by something far more humbling: recognition. They looked at him not as a monster, not as an enemy, but as the result of a story in which they themselves had also played the antagonists. And the Grinch, surprised by the absence of attacks or excuses, walked forward with the caution of someone who fears everything is an emotional trap. But it wasn't. Not this time. The mayor was the first to approach. He didn't do it with speeches or commands, but with trembling hands and wet eyes. And when he murmured, "I'm sorry," the entire town seemed to hold its breath. Because those two words were more than an apology. They were a collapse. They were the demolition of decades of pride, of masks, of hypocrisy wrapped in lights. They were the acknowledgement that they had failed not only him, but themselves. Cindy Lou, with the tenderness only children who see beyond the surface possess, took the Grinch's hand and led him to the center of the circle. She didn't invite him to celebrate, she invited him to belong. And when the other Whos approached, one by one, without fear, without hesitation, something powerful happened. For the first time in Whoville's history, Christmas didn't depend on decorations, gifts, or competitions. It depended on the courage to accept the truth. They sang, not to show off,
not to compete. They sang because they needed to. It was a timid song, almost broken, filled with a blend of regret, hope, and the kind of pain that paradoxically purifies. And the Grinch, caught in the center of that collective redemption, felt his heart beat differently. It didn't suddenly grow 3 sizes. That only happens in simple stories. In emotional reality, the heart doesn't grow. It opens. It allows itself to feel. It allows itself to trust. And in that moment, he allowed something he never had before, to let his guard down.
The rest of the day was a quiet act of emotional reconstruction. There was no need for brightness, no need for grandeur. They shared simple food, awkward laughter, stories they had never dared to tell. They listened. They truly looked at one another. And Whoville, that town that had always shone outward, finally began to shine inward. Because that is the most uncomfortable truth, but also the most liberating one. A society can change. An individual can change. But only when they dare to look into the darkness they carry within. The Whos did it. The Grinch did it. And in that imperfect, painful, honest encounter, they found something that not even 1,000 lights could have offered them. A Christmas that didn't depend on what they had, but on who they chose to become. That was the Christmas they never forgot, the only one that was truly worth remembering. The Christmas in which, for the first time, Whoville stopped shining, so it could finally learn how to illuminate. If this story made you feel something, even a sigh, even the faintest pinch in your chest, if for a moment you saw yourself in the Whos, in the Grinch, or in any of the shadows we all carry, then I invite you to stay, to be part of this community that tries, story after story, to understand the world and understand itself. Subscribe. Don't leave it for later. This channel lives because of people like you, people who feel, who reflect, who look for something deeper than just entertainment. Give it a like if this journey stirred something inside you, and tell me in the comments which part hit you the hardest, what made you think about your own life, what truth you discovered while listening to this story. Your comment isn't just text, it's the echo that keeps this conversation alive. Your like isn't just a button, it's the way this message reaches more people. And your subscription is a yes to keep exploring together the lights and shadows that make us human. So don't leave without leaving your mark. I'll be reading you below, and thank you for being here.